There has been much ado recently, in certain circles, about collapsing birth rates in the developed world, and particularly the United States. This absolutely is occurring. However, what these current day Cassandras are doing is diagnosing and proposing solutions to the symptom and not the underlying causes. The roots of the issue are grounded in problems identified by Robert Malthus all the way back in 1798, that population growth is exponential while resource growth is linear. Eventually, this dissonance becomes unsustainable, and the result is population collapse in what is now known as a Malthusian catastrophe or crisis. The basic concept behind this is one that's foundational to the natural world. Anyone who took high school biology understands the idea of equilibrium in an ecosystem, in which a balance between living and non living things keeps the system in homeostasis. When one part of the system becomes out of balance, the system reacts to restore the balance, sometimes in violent and painful ways. The laws of nature are ironclad and unfeeling. Let's first look at the basics of Malthus' argument. Given that he was writing at the start of the Industrial Revolution, when most economies were still agrarian, Malthus' focus was on the intersection between population and the food supply. As previously stated, it was the proposition that human births and the population growth rate had no limiting factor on it. Agricultural production, on the other hand, was more constrained with the available land, techniques, and technology of the time. According to Malthus, this leads to a constant cycle of shortages and abundance, with the population growing rapidly and then declining back to the more linearly growing food supply. We can see examples of this population cycle in nature. An abundant rainy season leads to lush vegetation growth. Herbivores multiply in number beyond the normal carrying capacity of the ecosystem. Eventually, either worsening climate conditions cause famine and starvation, or the predators expand in number. The predators are subject to this as well, if they grow too numerous. Their own limited food supply may lead some to die off, thus returning the ecosystem to the state of equilibrium. This isn't just a theoretical principle either. One example is St. Matthew Island, which in 1944 had 29 reindeer introduced. Nearly 20 years later, in 1963, the population of reindeer had exploded to well over 6,000. Yet, just 2 years later, in 1965, it had dramatically collapsed down to 42, close to the initial number. Some animals have actually evolved to act in accordance with these laws of nature. Female bears, after they are impregnated, grow specific numbers of cubs based upon how many calories they consume, which is a reflection of resources existing in their environment. In his work, An Essay on the Principle of Population, Malthus describes it thusly: "The food, therefore, which before supported 7 million, must now be divided among 8 million. The poor, consequently, must live much worse, and many of them be reduced to severe distress. The number of laborers also being above the proportion of the work in the market, the price of labor must tend toward a decrease, while the price of provisions would at the same time tend to rise. The laborer, therefore, must work harder to earn the same as he did before. During this season of distress, the discouragement to marriage and the difficulty of rearing a family are so great, the population is at a stand." Later in the essay, Malthus describes how human nature has often led mankind to act as its own check on population growth. He writes, "Famine seems to be the last, the most dreadful resource of nature. The power of population is so superior to the power of the earth to produce subsistence for man, that premature death must, in some shape or other, visit the human race. The vices of mankind are active and able ministers of depopulation. They are the precursors in the great army of destruction, and often finish the dreadful work themselves. But should they fail in this war of extermination, sickly seasons, epidemics, pestilence, and plague advance in terrific array, and sweep off their thousands and tens of thousands. Should success still be incomplete, gigantic, inevitable famine stalks in the rear, and with one mighty blow levels the population with the food of the world. Critics of Malthusianism have cited that the Industrial Revolution and further subsequent advancements have erased the limiting factor on food production, and therefore the negative consequences of exponential population growth have been removed. However, subsequent research has shown that better agricultural technology has increased population sizes and density over time. What they also show, though, is that although populations grow in size, the standard of living of the median member of that population has remained roughly equal. This data encompasses the period from ancient Babylonia in 1800 BC through to the modern day. In the 20th century, following the end of the World Wars, and during the Pax Americana that existed over much of the world, the number of deaths from violence has dropped dramatically. Further, modern advancements in medicine, alongside agricultural improvements, have people living longer across the world. This has resulted in the world population quadrupling in the last 100 years, whereas in the 100 years prior, it only doubled. Even still, in this modern era, isolated case studies of this dynamic playing out can still be seen. Sudan is one example where advancements in reducing mortality have led to a population growth rate more than double the amount needed for replacement. However, the local economy, society, and food supply are unable to carry the expanding population, and the country has devolved into famine and an internal civil war that already has deaths in the hundreds of thousands. While Malthusianism has numerous critics that range from Marxists to libertarians and feminists to Christians, it also has proponents as well, some of whom have promoted what has been called neo-Malthusianism. This theory has generally used Malthus concepts and concerns over overpopulation, resource depletion, and environmental degradation that will potentially lead to total ecological collapse as a justification for certain human population control policies. However, this neo-Malthusianism itself has also received criticism as a cover for eugenic policies and ideas. Now that we have an understanding of Malthusianism and the classical definition of the term, let us analyze whether the concepts can extend beyond just the basics of human survival. This is where the current prophets of Western population decline start to lose their way. They identify a trend, but offer solutions that don't directly deal with the foundational causes. This is partly because they are more abstract. Man cannot live on bread alone, and therefore, while the laws of equilibrium regarding man's physical needs still apply, there are other requirements for living that have become scarce in our modern world. This can be seen by viewing it through the lens of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Let's start off with what the birth rate prognosticators get right. It can be seen in their proposed solutions to the problem. Raising children in Western civilization has become impossibly expensive for the average individual. The reasons for this are numerous. Malthus identified one, and that is that the increased population in a globalized economy has massively devalued the value of people's labor. A fourfold devaluation if you assume a one-for-one with the scale of the growth. This is then combined with governments that have enormously devalued the value of their currencies over the last century to the benefit of the asset-owning classes. When combined with the regulatory capture that large multinational companies have achieved, the people are limited from the best historical path to wealth through creating their own business. This leads to the masses being the equivalent of replaceable and indentured wage laborers of continually diminishing value, while simultaneously their meager earnings are inflated away. This hits at the second pillar of Maslow's hierarchy, which is the safety and security of your employment and health. To some extent, it also impacts the bottom tier as it relates to shelter, as wage laborers can never make enough to actually own property and are stuck renting. Why would people who are struggling to make ends meet and concerned about day-to-day survival try to purposely add a child into that struggle? Now, the proponents of population growth have tried to promote policy solutions to address this. However, on both the right and the left, this takes the form of continued transfer payments. The term transfer payments itself is a lie, since it's not being taken from others, but the individual's own future, as the government borrows at a massive deficit, further devaluing the wages those people will make in the future. It's simply a further continuation of the doom loop, because eventually the money will run out. Most people likely don't even necessarily recognize this situation in such explicit terms, but it definitely permeates the society's general psychological state. Everybody knows something is wrong. Everyone knows that even if they work hard, they're still getting screwed. Why purposely subject a future child to that? This societal psychosis starts eating away at the top parts of Maslow's pyramid, especially when you combine it with the loss of community, family, and faith. The sudden explosion in people suffering from depression becomes understandable. For the most part, people aren't starving in the streets and they still have shelter. Yet, the population has shot beyond the carrying capacity of civilization's ability to deliver on the other necessities that free-thinking humans have. The top part of Maslow's hierarchy aren't luxuries, they are needs. Having the bottom two is a function of being alive. The top three drive the experience of living. It sounds semantic, but I would argue that it is a real and important distinction. This behavioral sync that we are observing can be seen in the experiments with rodents that John B. Calhoun ran in the late 1950s and early 60s. There are other videos on YouTube on this that dive deep into that experiment and its results, and I would highly recommend them. The short of it is, though, that Calhoun created what have been referred to as mouse utopias, in which colonies of rodents were placed in controlled environments in which they had unlimited food, water, and shelter, as well as no predators. As would be expected, the population exploded. However, well before any carrying capacity had been reached, the populations collapsed into extinction in every iteration. That was just with rodents. We should therefore expect humans to come with higher degree needs that need to be met. Unfortunately, in this modern world, they aren't, though. Cultural Marxism, critical theory, and other unchecked leftist ideologies have removed the values that are foundational to long-term relationships, well-formed families, and any sense of community. Further, we have replaced faith with nihilism. With nothing to believe in, nothing to live for, and a future that, at best, can be described as bleak, people have been reduced to chasing after short-term hedonistic indulgences. This is the core cause of the population collapse. It's not that we cannot provide for the basic needs of people. That's the easy part. It's that society can no longer fulfill the higher needs that are required for living well, and to provide the drive to give life to progeny that also has something to live for. Anything else is just a band-aid on an arterial bleed. We will continue hemorrhaging population until these root issues are solved. The rules of nature are heartless, and through both natural or man-made means, the human species will be reduced to a level where equilibrium for all needs is reestablished. We can only hope, though, that the correction doesn't result in the same end as Mouse Utopia. Thank you for listening and honoring me with your time. Please like, subscribe, and sign up for alerts if you want to see more content like this.